for you guys, these fantasy addicts who are listening to this, these are the guys you need to know for the 49ers.
And with that said, here's Grant Cohn of the Press Democrat. We are thrilled, I repeat, thrilled to welcome Grant Cohn, who covers the 49ers, San Francisco 49ers for the Press Democrat in Santa Rosa. Writes a couple columns a week online that are going to show up on the website as well. And, when we look for guests for the podcast, the Wolf looks for people that have interesting things to say, regardless of what team they cover, where they're situated in the country, and specifically was interested in Grant. So thanks so much for joining us today, man. I can't wait to hear what you have to say about the train wreck that has been the 49ers recently.
My pleasure. Thanks for reaching out to me, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no sweat. Real quick, you want to say a little bit about yourself? What's your angle? Like, you work for any other websites or anything like that you want to pump before we get started, or anything like that you want to drop?
This is my 7th season covering the 49ers for the Santa Rosa Press Democrat. I'm connected in the league. These opinions aren't just mine. I talk these through with people that know a lot more about the game than I do, so
nice.
Keep that in mind.
I will keep that in mind. I appreciate it. All right. You mind if I hit you with the ridiculous hypothetical that I've hit a bunch of other sports writers with before we get started, just to see where your head's at?
Sure.
All right. So what's your least favorite football team?
My least favorite football team.
Like, is there a team you just really, really can't stand?
The Rams.
Okay. There you go.
I'm not a fan. But whenever I have to watch them twice a year, and they play the Niners, and they're always terrible. They're always worse than you think. Their offense is boring. They just seem like they should be a lot better than they are, and it's boring to watch them play.
That's a great answer, and this is actually going to fit well for what I'm going to ask you. So your first option in this would you rather hypothetical is that you have to hold a minor press conference, put on your website, anybody that follows you, and you have to officially declare yourself a Rams fan for life, and that you are going to be a supporter of the Rams and everything they're about for the rest of your life. And you have to go all in. It can't be fake. Like, you got to go to their games. You got to have arguments with people like me about why the Rams are great and misunderstood, stuff like that. That's you for the rest of your life. That's option number one. Option number two is you stand on the 50-yard line of a football field, and you have to just stand there. You're not wearing any pads except maybe one of those 1930s leather helmets without the face mask. And you have to let prime Marshawn Lynch get a 15-yard head start and just plow you over one time. Which one do you choose?
The first one sounds awful, but I'm not going to pretend like I could withstand that hit. I've seen Marshawn Lynch in person a lot of times. He would kill me. So I guess I'd have to go with option one, just out of survival.
Right. So it's interesting because I happen to agree with you, Grant. But we've asked this question to maybe 5 different writers so far, and they're pretty much split down the middle. About half of them are like, yeah, I'd take the hit. I'd recover, and I'm like, are you sure?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. I respect.
Have they seen him play in person?
Right. Maybe these are mostly, just to be fair, these are mostly East Coast guys, so maybe they don't know what they're talking about. All right. Well, thanks for indulging me on that one. We'll get right into the actual interview. That's a point for Marshawn there, I would say. All right, Trakoff, why don't you go ahead and take us away?
Absolutely. So earlier in the show, me and Nat were talking about Kyle Shanahan, of course, because he's the new head coach, and he does a lot of different things really well. And one of them that fantasy owners drool over is his backfield. He has the zone blocking scheme everybody loves. He's made some great, there's so many stats about, we went through them, about how much the rushing yards on average have gone up by 286. Touchdowns have gone up, rushing attempts go up. So it's always productive. And the other thing that is consistent, I guess is a weird word, is it's inconsistent who that guy's going to be. He never really commits to one guy if he's the incumbent or whatnot. So we just want to get a clearer picture. I think that's the most important thing to discuss with you today is this backfield. And obviously Carlos Hyde was the guy last year coming off a solid season, but what's going on with him? Is he going to be the guy? What are you seeing so far? What are you hearing so far?
Well, I think he's got an opportunity to be the guy, and I think preseason is going to be big for him. If he plays well in the preseason, he'll probably be the starter. But if he doesn't play well in the preseason, I wouldn't be surprised if they try to trade him. Early on in OTAs, it's tough to judge a running back, but you can judge him on certain characteristics. And so far, he hasn't played well in OTAs. He's getting stopped behind the line a lot. He seems indecisive. And the thing that you want to see with these Shanahan outside zone running backs, the most important characteristic is vision. It's much more important than with other types of running because the run could theoretically go anywhere. You're pressing the run to the outside, but you could cut back. You have to find the hole. It's not like with a power running scheme where you're running through a particular gap, or with inside zone from the shotgun where you're just following the double team, the center guard double team, and running off of that. Vision's really important, and that's why guys like Arian Foster were successful, or Alfred Morris. They weren't necessarily the most athletic running backs, but they found the hole better than other running backs. And not just the vision, but the ability to find the hole and then quickly plant on one foot and cut up field. Not multiple cuts. It's a one cut and downhill running style. So those two things. And when I've watched a lot of Carlos Hyde, he's very good at certain things. He's terrific from the pistol and shotgun formations, running that zone read. He has a great feel for it. He's been doing it since Ohio State. He's great at breaking tackles. He's great at bouncing inside runs to the outside. He's more nimble than you would expect a big guy to be. But when I think of Carlos Hyde and his positive characteristics, I don't really think of vision. That's just not who he is to me. He also likes to dance in the backfield. He likes to gather his feet and cut back across the formation. And you really can't do that in this particular scheme. You really have to make one cut off one foot and get downhill. And that just doesn't he seems like a terrible fit for this scheme. It's early to say that for certain. Like I said, we'll all see him in the preseason, and that will be revealing. But until now, I think I would be very worried to invest in him in fantasy.
I think that's a really good point. So who do you see challenge him? A name we hear often right now is Joe Williams, the rookie. Is he the biggest threat, or if he's going to give this job up, who's the one that's coming in and taking it? Well,
that's a great question, and I think that it's not as simple as one person, because Joe Williams could I think it would most likely be Joe Williams. They draft him in the 4th round. That's when the Falcons took Devontae Freeman. It's a high investment, and it seems like the guy they want for the long term. But that doesn't mean that he'll be ready to go week one. Shanahan's offense is complicated. There's a lot of words. It may take rookies and newcomers a while to get that down. Early on, it could be Tim Hightower. He comes from he has experience in this offense. He's played for Shanahan before. He's played in zone running schemes. He might be the person who gets a lot of carries early on in the season until Joe Williams is ready, if Carlos Hyde isn't the guy at the back for them.
Interesting. And so we did actually a little study on this, and Tim Hyde, like you said, he's a guy that's played in the scheme. Whenever Shanahan's picked a rookie, that rookie's ended up being the starter by the end of the year. So that is a very possible situation. The guy who's comfortable, knows the scheme a bit, starts, but then you finish with Joe Williams. So that might be the strategy there, assuming Carlos Hyde is gone. You have to take Hightower first, but also make sure you have Williams, who knows. It's going to be a very interesting thing. I don't know if you've read any of those reports, but Peter King wrote this great article about how Joe Williams, they were saying like Shanahan was going to lose sleep if he didn't get him, and it's just the guy that he really wanted. So have you heard anything else about Shanahan loving this guy, or any other details on him? He's just a buzzy name right now.
It's not just Shanahan, but it's Bobby Turner, the running back coach who coached Terrell Davis and all those guys with Mike Shanahan. Bobby Turner is like the Yoda of the outside zone running scheme. And he's the one, as well as Kyle Shanahan, that handpicked Joe Williams. And not that this means anything, but Joe Williams was my favorite running back all throughout the draft. I had no idea that the 49ers were into him. I loved him. I thought he was terrific. And I mocked him to the Niners constantly. And all the readers would always say, no, the Niners aren't going to be into him. He retired from football. He doesn't love the game. Well, the Niners weren't concerned. He is I think he's a phenomenal talent. He's a natural. I think he's going to get this job eventually. It's just there's a big learning curve in this particular offense. I think for a long time, newcomers, they hear the play and they're still translating it or trying to figure out what exactly they have to do, while someone like Tim Hightower will understand it quicker in the huddle early in the season.
Perfect. And just real quick, who do you think Hyde is gone? If you had to, I know like you said, it's too early to predict these things and whatnot, but if gun to your head, you had to pick, is he there or is he gone? Do you think before the season, is Hyde going to be there?
I don't think he's going to be there, but that's my. It's too early to say, but I don't think he's going to be there. I think it's going to show that he's a poor fit in preseason, and they're going to trade him to a team like the Giants or the Packers. So there's a bunch of teams that I think would give up maybe a 6th or 7th round pick for a guy like him, and the Niners would say, sure, fine.
Packers would be a very interesting fit. And last but not least about the run game, because again, this is just such a big, valuable. There's not too much to get excited about fantasy-wise, but the run game is the line, though, is it going to be enough to execute this regardless of who's back there? How's this offensive line looking?
That's a good question. Shanahan usually has very specific athletic traits he looks for in these offensive linemen. He wants guys that are really fast, that can move and run down the line, and the Niners don't really have that. I mean, Garnett's slower, Trent Brown's slower, Zane Beadles is slower, Daniel Kilgore is slower. The only guy that really fits is Joe Staley. Now, they've signed a bunch of sort of backup guys like Gary Gilliam, who fits those traits, is a little bit faster, but he's awful in pass protection. So I don't know if they can even afford to play a guy like Gary Gilliam over Trent Brown, who's pretty good in pass protection, but doesn't necessarily fit the scheme for the running game. And I have noticed in OTAs that even though there's no contact, there's no live hitting, there has been a lot of gap penetration that the offensive line is giving up on those outside run plays. So it's definitely something to watch, and it's not certain that line is going to be good. Is going to be a good run blocking line. Kyle Shanahan really hasn't had time to make it over.
Very valuable stuff. I know Nat wants to get into the passing game now, but that
absolutely do. But I also want to just say I'm an unapologetic lifelong Broncos fan, so the fact that you brought up anyone connected to Terrell Davis made me really happy. Thumbs up there. In addition to the lead,
how good Bobby Turner is.
I think you're more educated on specifically Bobby Turner than me, but I've watched probably every snap that Terrell Davis ever played in the pros and was highly impressed. So if this guy's going to turn out the same sort of production
and
with somebody else.
And how fast was Terrell Davis? You understand what made him great was
he could hit the hole like a maniac. Exactly. I mean, just like one of the best I've ever seen, honestly, at that. And obviously some of that is probably innate in him, and some of that was probably taught. So that's a nice guy to have on your resume. Number 6 on our interview. In addition to the league running backs, Shanahan's number 1 or X receiver has always been really productive. And obviously most recently we're looking at Julio Jones, but I mean even the recently retired Andre Johnson had those huge seasons in Houston. Shanahan loves hitting the number 1 guy with ball after ball. So that brings us obviously to Pierre Garçon. Under Shanahan in 2013, he led the league, which seems like so long ago, but it really wasn't that long ago. He led the league in both targets with 181 and receptions. 113 had a 1,300-yard receiving season. Obviously, he didn't end up on the 49ers by accident. He was a target of theirs in free agency in this offseason. You expecting a big year out of him?
I was expecting a big year out of him when they signed him because clearly Shanahan loves him and has a plan for him. But just watching him in OTAs, and you can't draw too much from OTAs, but still, you can get more from the wide receivers than the linemen. I just expected him to be better. I mean, my context is I watched a lot of Anquan Boldin in OTAs, and he always dominated practice, always. And he was older than Garçon. And so far, Garçon, he'll catch maybe one pass of practice, and he's really having trouble beating Rashard Robinson, the Niners' number 1 cornerback, who was their 4th-round pick last year, who may be pretty good, but I would expect that Garçon would be able to beat him. He's much more experienced than Rashard Robinson. So to me, Garçon just looks a little old. He's not creating separation, and he's not winning the routes the way Bolden used to do it in practices, which is what I was expecting to see from Garçon. Also, when the season starts, he's really their only threat, and you have to figure that on 3rd downs, teams are going to double him. I mean, why wouldn't you? I mean, so I would be a little concerned. He just got a lot of money. He's a little bit older. A lot of times, receivers like that slow down. He wasn't that fast to begin with. I wouldn't expect 100 catches. I think maybe more like 50 to 60 would be reasonable. Yeah. I mean, I don't think you can just look at his 2013 stats under Kyle Shanahan and project that again 4 years down the line.
Yeah, a lot of stuff very different. It's interesting to hear you say that because if I had to predict, I wouldn't predict that much of a season out of Garcon for a lot of the reasons you're saying. Of course, I'm not getting to see him in practice, catch one ball practice, but for all those reasons you're saying, I'm a little bit skeptical that he's going to have a big blow up year also. But with that said, I mean, is there any receiver on the 49ers roster that you could see stepping up and having a surprisingly good season?
Well, the guy that comes to mind is Marquise Goodwin. I mean, he's always hurt, but if he can stay healthy, he's similar to Taylor Gabriel, who had a lot of success under Kyle Shanahan. One thing, I would expect the Niners to make a run at Jeremy Maclin. I mean, he's out there. It's something to keep an eye on because he would be such a massive upgrade over Marquise Goodwin as a starter. He would complement Garcon as well. Garcon runs mostly short and intermediate routes, and Maclin would give the team somewhat of a vertical presence. I don't know if that's what's going to happen, but it seems like a no-brainer. The Niners have more cap space than any other team, and they need a guy like that. But if they don't get Maclin, Goodwin is going to start, and he will be sort of their Taylor Gabriel deep threat. But also on third downs, if teams are going to double Garcon, Jeremy Curley is going to be their slot receiver. He caught a lot of passes last year. He's a good player. He's an underrated player, and he could be the guy that Hoyer goes to if Garcon's doubled on 3rd and 6.
Okay, one last passing game-ish question. Is Brian Hoyer really the man there? Is he locked in by any means? Are they furiously still looking? And if he is locked in, what do you think? I mean, is he going to be relevant at all? Not just fantasy-wise, but even NFL-wise? Yeah.
I think he's locked in. They're not having a competition. They're not giving Matt Barkley any first-team reps. I think they want Hoyer to be the guy. And just from what I've seen of him, some days he'll look fantastic. Some days he'll be almost perfect. The next day he'll be awful. I mean, the last time I saw him, he completed 10 of 20 passes, which is like you'd think a guy would be able to do better in a non-contact practice. He's just an inconsistent player, which is, I guess, why he's been a journeyman his whole life. But what I see from him, I think the reason they like him is if you look at his split stats, like his advanced stats, he's really good at play action. The last time he was with Kyle Shanahan, which was 2014 in Cleveland, his passer rating on play action passes was 99, which is definitely above average. And that's how this team is going to work. They're going to want to be a run first, play action pass second team, and try to keep it in the 3rd and short. And that's how, if they're going to win, that's how they're going to do it. So I think Brian Hoyer is the best fit for that they could get this offseason. He's a much better fit than Kaepernick would have been or other quarterbacks who were available. So I do think that Brian Hoyer is going to have a decent season. Obviously, you can't do play action passes every time. And when he doesn't have the benefit of play action, his efficiency drops significantly. But I think he's their guy until he gets hurt, which he tends to do. And in which case, I thought Matt Barkley played pretty well last year, especially against the 49ers and the Packers, those two games. So I think I'm actually pretty optimistic about this team. I think it's going to be better than people realize.
Okay, well, maybe that transitions into what was going to be one of our final questions, because we actually had a little bit of a disagreement a couple episodes ago about what we thought the 49ers record was going to be. What do you think obviously this is crazy speculation at this point, but what do you think the 49ers record's going to be? How many games?
I think they're going to win 9 games. I think they're going to win 9 games. Wow. And not because I think they're so great, because obviously they're not, but for a couple of reasons.
Give them to me.
One is a few reasons. One is they were not as bad as their record indicated last year. They were one of the worst, probably the worst coached team in football. Chip Kelly was terrible in a lot of ways, and now he's gone. I thought that was more of like a 4-5 win team last year that won 2 games. So take it from there. I think that going from Chip Kelly to Kyle Shanahan's a big deal. I think that they had a good running game last year, but they had a terrible play-action passing game because for a lot of reasons. As you guys probably know, play-action passing and a good play-action game really doesn't have to do with a good running game. It has to do with how much the play-action passes look like the run plays. And with with Chip Kelly on his play action passes, the offensive linemen were already in pass sets. I mean, you could tell it was like tipping your changeup. With Kyle Shanahan's play action pass, he's the best year after year is the best play action passing game. His that stretch zone really pairs well with the play action bootleg off of it. I mean, you get the defense going one way, then you hit him the other way. It's worked well for a long time. Worked well for his dad. So that's two reasons. The last reason is when you make these predictions, you have to look at the schedule. You can't just say that this is.
I was just going to say, who are they beating? Nine out of nine of these.
You got to look at the schedule because it's not just like they're a 9-win team. Like they have, first of all, their division is getting a lot weaker.
They're going to get 2 against the Rams.
The Cardinals are getting worse.
I agree.
Palmer should be done, and also I think the Seahawks are getting worse too. They're always tough. I don't think the Niners are going to beat the Seahawks next year, but I think they're going to beat the Rams twice. They're going to beat the Cardinals once. So I think they'll go 500 in their division. And then they face the AFC South, which there's a bunch of beatable teams. I mean, the best team in that division won 9 games last season.
Are they going to play in London? Are they going to play in London by any chance against the Jacksonville Jaguars? That seems like the type of game we might ship over. We might ship that type of game over there. That's true. I mean, I said they were going to go 5-11, and that was significantly higher than what the Wolf was predicting. That was the prediction that I was taking heat for. So I feel like if Shanahan takes them to 9-7, he's going to. I mean, that's his ticket punched forever as a head coach, pretty much. I mean, that would be an amazing accomplishment. What do you think of that,
Just
Wolf?
keep in mind, I'm not a homer. I'm usually very hard on the 49ers. I just think that one more thing. I mean, I think that the Niners saw that they had an opportunity with a weak schedule, and I expected going into this offseason that they would go young, like the Browns. I mean, that's usually how teams rebuild, especially when the head coach and the general manager both have 6-year contracts. I mean, if they wanted to go with the youngest team in football and build for down the line, they could have done that and said, look, we're going to win 2-3 games this year. Bear with us. Fans would have said, fine. But they signed a bunch of old guys. They signed guys in their 30s, Garcon, Hoyer, Jeremy Zoot. I mean, a lot of guys. And that just told me that they're going for it right now. They want guys that know the system, guys that can compete now. They think they have an opportunity, and they're going for it. And when you look at the schedule, I think that there's something to that. I think there's a lot of winnable games. It doesn't mean that they're going to win all their winnable games, but I think 8-9 wins is definitely more within reach than you would expect.
All right, I'll give you credit for a ballsy prediction. All right.
I like it. One last question. This is more logistical than anything. How do you say, we've been trying to figure this one out, how do you say that fullback's name, the guy they signed, Kyle?
It's Juszczyk.
Juszczyk. Okay.
This is the type of hard hitting stuff that we're getting down to the bottom of on this podcast.
I didn't know, but I also think he's actually fairly important. What does he bring to the table in terms of the run game, passing game? Because Kyle Shanahan's had him before, and he clearly went out and got him. Why is that like an underrated, sneaky acquisition for fantasy?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was looking at him earlier. Last year, Devontae Freeman caught like 55 passes for the Falcons. Shanahan likes throwing to the backs. And on this particular team, the best receiving back on the team is Juszczyk. I mean, it's not Hyde. It's probably not Williams. He caught like 9 passes last year at Utah. It's probably not Hightower. It's Juszczyk, and they don't use him just as a fullback. They use him as a tight end too. I've seen him in practice. They've split him out at wide receiver. They like to put him in a lot of different places. He's going to play a lot of snaps, and he's going to be used as a receiver as much or more than he's used as a blocker. So that is someone that fantasy people want to keep in mind, especially in points per reception leagues, because he could get 50 plus catches next year. He had 37 last season. He could get 50 this year.
Are you a fantasy guy yourself, Grant? Do you play?
I've been playing since I was like 13.
Oh, nice. Very nice.
Love
You're
it.
a big fantasy guy. I love it. That's fantastic. Yeah. Well, man, this was a great interview. You threw some cold water. I know it's OTAs, and again, I want to make sure I recognize that you said you can't overreact, as you can't. But early on, signs of cold water for guys that are people really high on the community, Pierre Garcon and Carlos Hyde. So it'll be interesting. Hopefully, maybe we can catch back up when training camp hits, and we can see is the cold water still warranted? Is Hyde picking things up, or Pierre Garcon looking younger and more nimble? It'd be great to catch back up and see it. But we really appreciate this these takes because very few people in the fantasy community recognize these things and aren't on the inside scoop like you. So this was great. Really appreciate the time. It was awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I had a great time. Let's do it again sometime.
Appreciate it, Grant.
Awesome.
Thanks.